There are only 3 types of darkness in a basement: the old, the new, and the kind that never leaves, no matter how many bulbs you replace. I found an unlabeled VHS tape in my dead grandmother's things. No title, just faint handwriting on the spine that read Family 94. We never filmed a Family 94. When I slid it into the old Zenith and pressed play, my grandmother appeared on the screen. Years younger, smiling at something that wasn't on camera. Her eyes wrong. I didn't want to keep watching, but the tape was already rolling, and something inside it had already started to watch back. Some tapes don't just play memories. Some tapes remember you. Some images don't stay on the screen. They crawl out and wait in the dark until you're alone. Welcome to Ethereal Echoes. Here, you'll find slow-burning psychological thrillers and atmospheric stories meant to be experienced in the dark. New episodes are released every Wednesday and Friday. And if you prefer to listen without ads and hear new stories early, you can join us on Patreon. For now, settle in, get comfortable, and let the world fade away. Tonight's story begins in the quiet dust of an old basement, where one unlabeled tape waited patiently for someone to press play and discover that some recordings never really end. There are only 3 types of darkness in a basement: the old, the new, and the kind that never leaves, no matter how many bulbs you replace. I learned this beneath my grandmother's house, dusted in fine silt and carrying the mild, embalming chill of a crypt. When she finally slipped off, midwinter, tongue black with regret, she left me the basement to box and purge. My mother said it was a penance, that I was the only one delicate enough to do the job properly. Delicacy is a poor match for mildew and mouse droppings, but a favor owed is a favor paid. The smell met me before the stairs did, something between a shuttered pharmacy and an abandoned library. Age has a scent, and it's not romantic, no matter what writers say. I flicked the light, and the hum buzzed through the joists. Dust shivered from the crossbeams. The shadow of jarred fruit and rusted tools stretched in geometric silence. At the base of the stairs, I slipped on a defunct Christmas tree and greeted the floorboards with my knee. The pain was sharp, immediate, and oddly grounding. Boxes everywhere, of course, labeled by a dead woman's hand. Canning, 1977 to 81. Magazines, don't toss. Taxes, plead the 5th. Some were brimming, some only holding the ghosts of their contents. I half expected her to step out of the darkness, arms folded, voice sharp as a salt line. Don't bother sorting the National Geographics. Just stack them by color. But there was only a hush and 100 years of settling. I started with the low-hanging fruit, a pile of threadbare linens and plastic-wrapped comforters, yellowed with time and spattered with stains I didn't care to analyze. there was a whole box of glass ashtrays. My grandmother hadn't smoked in the last 40 years, but she kept the evidence, as if waiting for the vice to call her home. Beneath the layers, I found a stack of Polaroids, the subjects blurred and underexposed, faces hovering like white moths in a black room. The caption on one, in her shaky hand, "Dora after the stroke." I didn't even know who Dora was. Maybe I'd seen her once. The next box was lighter. I flicked the lid and found a tangle of cords, the rubber gone sticky and brown. A dozen remote controls, most dead of battery and dignity. And at the bottom, a ceramic bowl painted with violets, and beneath that, a sheaf of VHS tapes. Most were labeled in her careful block letters. Thanksgiving, 1991. Tommy's baptism. Funeral, Walt. I remembered these occasions only as a brief string of heat and noises, little more than TV static in the back of my skull. One tape, though, was stranger than the rest. It was a cheap, black clamshell, the kind that split along the seam if you looked at it wrong. There was no label at all, just a strip of yellow masking tape on the spine, the adhesive fossilized. Under the right light, I could almost read something beneath it, pressed into the plastic by a ballpoint. Family 94. The numbers were small and careful, as if afraid of being found. I didn't remember ever filming a Family 94. My grandmother didn't own a camera. We didn't do reunions. The only thing that happened in 1994 was that my uncle set his car on fire and got out of rehab in time for New Year's. Maybe the tape belonged to another family. Maybe it was a mistake, a home movie swapped at the video store or left behind by a stranger with neater handwriting. The TV was still down there, a blocky Zenith that had once been the height of suburban aspiration. Next to it, the VCR, both caked in a patina of spiderwebs and the flecks of dead bugs. I ran my finger along the power cord. It left a dark trail on my skin, like the residue of handling something freshly exhumed. I stared at the tape. It stared back, magnetic. My hands were already sliding it from its case, pressing it between my palms. I thought briefly about asking my mother, but I knew she would just wrinkle her nose and say, if it's not marked, it's probably nothing. She was afraid of blanks, had always been, whether in conversation or memory, or the reels we played for ourselves at night. I forced the tape into the slot. The machine's gears clicked, then whined, then sucked the cassette into its open mouth with a hunger I recognized. I fumbled for the remote, third from the left, as it turned out, and probed the play button. The TV stuttered, then flared alive with a static screech, all blue and white, and sudden movement. For a second, I thought it was going to eat itself, but then the image stabilized. I saw a room. It could have been anywhere. Stained carpet, a sagging couch, Christmas lights drooping along the crown molding. Someone was laughing off screen. It sounded like my mother, but I couldn't be sure. The tape shuddered again. The color bled out, and then I pressed pause, the frame locking in a grainy blur. The only thing I could see, dead center, was my grandmother's face. She was younger than I remember. Maybe 40, maybe less. She was smiling, but not at the camera. Not at anyone, really. Her eyes were wrong. Not blind, exactly, but not for me, either. I didn't want to hit play, but I already had. I waited. The image waited. The basement's darkness, the third kind, squeezed in a little closer. I let the tape run. At first, I wasn't sure it had even started. The image was so washed out, so shimmery at the edges, that I thought the TV was dying. After a few seconds, though, forms congulated from the fuzz. A hand holding a birthday candle, a voice reciting numbers in a way that wanted to be a song. My mother's living room, back when carpet was legal, and walls were a shade of beige now extinct. A little girl, my cousin, maybe, or someone else's memory, was sitting cross-legged in front of a cake shaped like a pig. 7 candles. Her face was wrapped with the kind of patience only available to children and the elderly. Voices fluttered around her like moths. Blow it out. Blow it out. She just waited, not blinking, until the wax had run into a moat around the wicks. When she finally breathed, it was a violence that startled even her. The tape shuddered, tracking lines crawling up from the bottom. The camera moved like it was being held by someone underwater, slow and unsteady. Every change of angle a little late. Faces passed by in close up, then jerked back as if the operator remembered it wasn't polite to stare. My uncle's hands in the corner of the frame, folding a napkin into quarters, over and over. A woman I didn't recognize, turning away whenever the lens found her. No one looked at the camera. No one spoke directly to it, or whoever was holding it. They just enacted the ritual, eyes drifting above or through each other, smiles flickering on and off in time with the Christmas lights. The grandmother was everywhere, sometimes in the background, sometimes just a slice of her shoulder at the edge of the frame, sometimes only her shadow across the linoleum. She never turned. She never spoke. She wore a blue housecoat with daisies, and her slippers had the soft collapse of a life lived entirely indoors. There was a heaviness to her, even in miniature. The tape loved her in a way that it didn't love the rest of us. The camera would drift from the scene, birthday hats, plates of cake, children shrieking into the void, and settle, almost fondly, on her as she moved from chair to chair, always cleaning, always wiping, always putting something back where it belonged. At one point, she passed directly in front of the lens, and for a moment, her face filled the screen. She looked tired, but not in the ordinary way. It was the tiredness of someone who had lived too many days and forgotten to mark any of them as special. Her mouth was moving, but the tape was silent. I thought maybe she was cursing under her breath, but I couldn't lip read through the artifacting. She faded out of view, leaving the camera staring at an empty chair. The sound came back. Just a hum. The kind that makes your molars ache if you listen too long. A jump cut. Then a different day. Christmas, judging by the density of wrapping paper in a seasonal affront of sweaters. The same people, arranged in almost the same positions. The little girl, older now, or maybe just a different girl. My uncle on the couch, napkinless, hands folded between his knees like a confession. Someone was crying off screen, but everyone ignored it with patient ease. The grandmother floated through, a blue shape. She never looked up. The colors bled. Red became orange. Orange went to gray. Flesh tones turned into something that felt like medical footage. The audio slipped behind the images. Laughter would come. Then, a second later, mouths would split open with joy that seemed stitched on. My own voice appeared. Just once, a laugh I didn't recognize, followed by a shriek that did not. The effect was like watching a dream someone else had about you. I pressed pause again. The room snapped into silence, and for a second, I could feel the pressure of the house above me, as if the floor were going to cave and swallow me up. The TV cast a pale, molted glow across the laundry piles. Every shadow looked like it was waiting to be chosen. The tape's timestamp read 00:12:06. I'd watched less than a minute in real time. My mouth was dry, my heart not racing but agitated. I found myself running my fingers over the edge of the remote, again and again, not really wanting to unpause, but unable to imagine doing anything else. I thought about calling my mother, just to ask if she remembered owning a camcorder, but the idea of saying the words out loud made me queasy. Besides, she always hated the phone, said it felt like talking to someone through a wall. The tape rolled on. Now it was summer. The family, such as it was, outside. Lawn chairs, a barbecue, children running in tight loops. My uncle in a tank top, his arms already the color of old paper. He was holding a spatula, but not using it, just turning it in his hand as if it might tell him something. I was in this part, a small, rodent-faced child wearing a t-shirt with a cartoon ghost on it. I didn't remember that shirt, but I remembered the feeling of it, the tag itching the back of my neck, the way my mother scrubbed out the stains with a violence not meant for the laundry. I watched myself kick at the grass, scowl at the camera, then wander out of frame like an actor finished with their scene. The grandmother sat at the picnic table. She was peeling a hard-boiled egg, slow and methodical, like a science experiment. No one joined her. No one even looked. The camera panned back and forth, landing on her again and again, as if pulled by gravity. For a moment, she seemed to catch the lens, just for a breath, just a twitch of her head. But her eyes slid off, unseeing. She finished the egg and set the shell halves together, then folded them into a napkin and tucked it in her pocket. The screen washed white, then blue, then black. A few seconds of darkness. Then the birthday scene again, but not the same one. This time, the cake was half eaten. Fewer people in the room. The camera moved in tighter, jitterier, as if the person holding it had started to shiver. Everyone smiled, but no one laughed. My cousin's eyes were glassy, fixed on the cake. My uncle's face was ruddy and raw, mouth set in a hard line. The woman with the evasive smile was gone. Chair empty, but a coat still slung over the back. The grandmother, unchanged, set a plate down and left the room. The audio lagged even worse now. Words became echoes. Laughter came as an aftershock. The grandmother's slippers slapped the tile, a metronome for a party that had lost its rhythm. The birthday girl blinked, once, slow as a frog, and I realized I'd been holding my own eyes open to see if she ever would. I blinked too, and when I looked back, everyone was gone. The camera panned around the room, slow, uncertain. There was nothing left but plates and crumbs, a balloon bouncing lazily against the ceiling. The tape was still running. The basement air was thick and sweet. Or maybe it was the dust settling deeper in my lungs. I stopped the tape, hands a little shaky. I wanted to go upstairs. I wanted to go anywhere else, to breathe something that didn't belong to the dead. But the tape, still hissing in the machine, held me there. It wanted to be watched. There are only 3 types of darkness in a basement, but there are thousands on a tape. I pressed play again. The tape restarted with the same living room, but the air inside it was heavier. I could sense it in the way furniture pressed close, the windows smeared with unseasonal condensation. Even the people on the screen seemed to carry an extra weight, as if they had just been told a secret they were not allowed to forget. A birthday again. Or maybe the same one, replayed from a new angle. The same little girl at the cake, but her hair was straighter, shinier, as if her mother spent extra time flattening out the whorls and knots. The party hat sat lower on everyone's brow, drooping like wilted petals. My uncle's hands were twitching now, folding and unfolding a napkin with relentless patience of a nervous tick. The woman who never looked at the camera was back, but her eyes were glassier, the whites too visible, like she was afraid to even blink. They sang again, "Happy Birthday," but the song was out of phase. The words came first, the lips flapped after, each verse a half beat further from the one before. On the third line, someone let the "dear" hang in the air a little too long. the name never arriving. Just an empty space for anyone to fill. When the candles were blown out, the room did not react. No cheers, no applause, just the low rumble of the tape hiss and the endless, unblinking eye of the camera. The cake was cut, plates were passed. A child dropped a piece on the carpet. The frosting left a purple wound. The grandmother shuffled in, hands in her housecoat pockets, and stared at the stain for a long time. She bent down and picked at the crumb with her nail, then wiped it against the baseboard. Her face turned to the lens, and for the first time, her eyes aligned with mine, just for a single hairline fracture of a second. The image buzzed, colors inverted, then snapped back. The camera zoomed in, slow and methodical, until all that remained was her mouth. Thin, cracked, stained the color of weak tea. The mouth twitched, tried to smile, and failed. The tape skipped. A noise, maybe laughter, or maybe just the TV's afterburn, filled the room. Another scene. My uncle at the kitchen table, a deck of cards laid out like a fortune. He shuffled, dealt, shuffled again, always looking off to the left, never quite at the camera. The camera circled him, slow and predatory, until it settled behind his shoulders. For a moment, his hands froze. Then, with glacial slowness, he turned his head, far past where the camera ought to be, and grinned. The smile carved too wide for the rest of his face. He didn't blink. He just kept smiling, long after the joke had faded, long after the tape should have cut away. It didn't. The camera lingered as if waiting for the smile to break. It never did. My skin prickled. I scratched at my arm, but it only made the sensation worse. The camera wandered the house now. Empty rooms, half-drawn curtains, piles of old newspapers. The only sound was the wheeze of the VCR's tracking, the hiss of the tape's own blood in its ears. It found the grandmother again, this time in the laundry room, folding a white sheet over and over, even though there was nowhere to put it. She looked up. The camera shuddered, then darted away, as if afraid of being seen. More parties, more holidays, but the people grew fewer. Sometimes someone would appear in one scene, only to vanish in the next. No fanfare, just an empty chair and a coat still waiting on its hook. I realized with a jolt that the tape was not a single movie, but a dozen fragments stitched together by someone who only half remembered how the world was supposed to work. The faces all blurred together, overexposed and time-stamped. Smiles held too long, hands that waved, then waved, then waved, as if the action had become a loop. In one frame, I saw myself, older, holding a plastic cup, eyes locked to the floor. The camera watched me for a long time, longer than I could bear. When I looked up, my lips were moving, but the tape played only silence. The camera had its own rhythm now. It would freeze on an object, a lamp, a coat rack, a crumbling bit of molding, then whip away, pan the room, and return to the same spot. Every time a little closer, a little more insistent. The sense grew inside me that the camera was not in anyone's hand. Not really. It moved as if it had always been there, as if it was the only thing in the house that could remember how to move. I tried to picture who could have filmed all this. My grandmother, I decided, would never waste money on a camcorder. My uncle? Maybe. But his hands shook too much, and he hated the sound of his own voice. My mother? Possibly. But she was always on the other side of the room, always moving, always busy. There were no reflections, no shadows at odd angles. In every shot, the cameraman was absent. A floating point of view, not even the ghost of a hand to ground it. My jaw ached. I realized I'd been clenching it, grinding my teeth with every skipped frame, every too bright face. The tape moved into autumn, leaves clogging the gutters, wind pressing the curtains tight to the windows. The family in sweaters now, some of them gone, the rest holding each other at arm's length. The grandmother poured cider into the mugs, lined them on the table, then sat at the end and stared straight ahead. Her eyes this time did not avoid the lens. They were fixed on it, unwavering. The camera drifted closer. My scalp tingled, as if someone had whispered a threat just behind my ear. Closer, closer. The tape shuddered. The image warped, flickered, then rightened itself. It was night. The house was dark except for the TV's sodium glow. The camera was on the move, prowling the hallway, pausing at every closed door. It pressed in on grandmother's room, catching the sliver of her silhouette as she sat at the edge of her bed, hands folded in her lap. She was talking to someone, or something. Her lips moved, but the tape held its tongue, refusing to translate. She nodded, smiled, reached a hand out towards the space beside her. The camera did not follow. It held her there, frozen, until the edges of the picture began to disintegrate. I stopped the tape. My hands buzzed. The room felt smaller, and the air was thick with the smell of old electronics and something else, sharp and mineral, like the inside of a metal can. The darkness in the corners seemed to bristle with static. I thought about unplugging the TV. I thought about burning the tape, taking it outside and burying it in the yard. Instead, I rewound to the start and watched it again. This time, I paid attention to what was missing. I watched the tape a second time. I told myself it was for clarity, that the first pass had been muddled by nerves, by grief, by the dry rot of memory. I lied. It was compulsion, pure and simple, the urge to scratch an itch until blood came. I started at the birthday scene, careful to keep my eyes off the center. Instead, I watched the margins, the wallpaper, the wobbly light of the windows, the spaces beneath the furniture. I scanned for continuity errors, for the little lapses in reality that always betrayed a fake. At first, I found only what I'd seen before, the long, offbeat pauses, the colors that bled at the seams. But as the tape unspooled, I saw something else, a movement, quick and not quite human, in the corner of the screen. It was there and gone before I could fix it in my head. A shadow or a trick of the tracking. I told myself it was nothing. I kept watching. In the kitchen scene with my uncle and the playing cards, the thing returned. This time, behind him. Just over his left shoulder, in the reflection of the oven door. Not a person, more like an outline of a person, barely denser than the air around it. The shape of a head and shoulders where none should be. I rewound. Slow motion, freeze-framed. The shadow was always there. Sometimes it moved when nothing else did. Sometimes it stayed perfectly still while the people in the room shifted and flickered past it. No one noticed. No one turned. Not once did my uncle glance behind him, not even when the shape seemed close enough to rest a hand on his collar. I didn't want to look at it anymore, but I had no choice. Every frame, every splice, I sought it out. In the birthday's background, hunched near the kitchen doorway. In the backyard, behind the slats of the fence. A faceless notch in the wood. On the porch, an extra shadow stretching over the threshold. The tape did not want to let me find it. Every time I rewound, the footage degraded further. The image buckled, colors reversed. Audio gargled into wet, organic sounds that were not speech. But the shadow grew clearer. With each pass it resolved. Less of a blotch, more of a silhouette. Tall, thin, 2 long arms, always just outside of the action, as if waiting for the cue to step in. I tried to recall the original parties. I couldn't. I had memories, but they were all memories of photographs or stories told by someone else, third-hand and moth-eaten. I never remembered a stranger at the table, a neighbor with penchant for the dark, a cousin whose face no longer liked to mention. But the tape insisted. The tape made its own history. The figure changed positions every time I watched. Sometimes, in the blue hour before sunset, it would drift past a window, slow as an oil slick. Sometimes it perched on the stairs, knees pressed to its chin, watching the family's rituals with intentness that curdled the back of my tongue. The worst was when it reappeared in the living room mirror. Not just a shadow this time, a real thing, pale and slender, dressed in nothing I recognized, hair the color of raw flour. It was never on the screen for long, just a flicker, just enough time to register its outline before the tape fuzzed and moved on. No one acknowledged it, not once. I rewound again and again, desperate for someone, anyone, to turn and say, "Who's that?" Or, "Did you invite a friend?" But the script never changed. The people did their dance, the cake was cut, and the candle snuffed, and the shadow always watched. The longer I watched, the more I felt like the tape was aware of me. I know how it sounds, but the sensation was undeniable. Every time I looked away, the image would freeze, as if waiting for my gaze to return. The figure grew bolder. It moved closer to the lens, hovered near the edge of the birthday table, crouched behind the grandmother's chair. Sometimes it was the only thing in focus. The glitches became intentional. The tape would stutter, repeat the same half-second over and over, until my brain started to accept the wrongness as normal. The audio developed whispers, then snatches of songs, then silence. The screen would turn to static, then resume with the shadow standing inches from the camera. I started to recognize it in a way, not its face, which was always blurred by the tape's refusal to clarify, but its posture, its hunger. It was a collector. It wanted to be in every frame, to anchor itself in the rituals of my family. My own reflection in the TV, warped by the glass, began to look like it. Or maybe it was the other way around. I paused the tape on a frame where the shadow was the clearest. The living room, everyone gone, and the figure standing alone in the center, arms at its side. I stared at it for a long time. The basement air was icy, a wet cold that had nothing to do with the season. My breath fogged in the light of the TV, hung there for a moment, then faded. I tried to eject the tape. The VCR resisted, spat it out halfway, as if reluctant to let it go. When I pried the cassette loose, the inside smelled of ozone and burnt hair. I turned it over in my hands, and the label had changed. The Family 94, now scrawled in darker ink, the numbers carved a little deeper. I should have stopped. I should have gone upstairs, locked the door, and forgotten it all. But that's not how the basement worked. That's not how memory works. I jammed the tape back in and pressed play, even though my hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the remote. The tape shivered back to life, and the shadow was waiting, closer than ever. The tape was different now. The living room, as always, but hollowed out. Furniture missing, party detritus swept away. The walls seemed farther apart, the light a shade grayer than I remembered. The tape ran with no sound at all, not even the background hiss, not even the familiar mechanical churn of the VCR. Absolute silence. No one appeared for the first 30 seconds. Then, in the far background, the grandmother drifted past the doorway, moving slower than possible. Each frame caught her in nearly the same position, like a flip book made by a child who hated animation. Her feet never left the carpet. She vanished into the next room, and the camera did not follow. Another cut, another room. The kitchen table set for a party, but every plate was empty. Every glass inverted over its rim like a bell. No one sat at the table, not even the ghosts of elbows or hands in the edge of the shot. The sunlight from the window was sickly and blue. The camera panned the table for a full minute, as if expecting guests to appear. Jump, the backyard, stripped stripped bare by winter, toys scattered in the grass, but none moving. The swing creaked in the wind, but there was no wind, only the camera's eye, scanning back and forth, growing more urgent, as if expecting to catch someone out of hiding. It never did. The tape flickered and resumed inside the house. The rooms were stripped of people, and those who remained were perfectly motionless. My uncle stood in the hallway, face turned away, one arm outreached towards the coat rack. His hand never reached it. It hovered, inched closer with each cut, but never quite made contact. He never blinked, never breathed, just posed, tableau, until the camera lost interest and moved on. The grandmother returned, always a step ahead of the lens. I watched her wander the house, stopping in doorways to peer into the next room. Sometimes she seemed to notice the camera behind her, turning her head as if to acknowledge the watcher, but she never met the lens. She never saw me, or I wondered if she had. The shadow was gone. It had become something else, a hollow in the air, a low-fidelity drag in the tape's magnetic memory. Sometimes the camera would stutter, as if bumping into an obstacle, then skipped around it, leaving a smear where something had once been. In the hallway mirror, the camera caught its own reflection for the first time. Not a camera, really. A dark shape, a suggestion of a body holding the camera at chest height. In the next cut, the mirror was cracked, spider-webbed across its surface, but the shape was still there, more distinct, its head bowed as if examining the room. It wasn't anyone I knew. The camera descended the stairs into the basement, the same basement I sat in now, knees locked, palms slick against the upholstery. The TV on the tape was the same as mine, though older, the edges frayed by decades of misuse. The camera circled the room, pausing on the laundry pile, the boxes, the empty air. Then it panned to the far corner, where a standing mirror leaned against the wall. The glass was clouded, but the figure holding the camera was visible. Taller than anyone in my family, hands long and thin, head cocked to one side. I blinked. The camera took a step closer. The figure's head twitched, matching my own. Another step. The image sharpened. The face was blank, a blur of static, but the body was unmistakable. Same clothes as I wore now, same posture, same thin cut on the chin of an old shaving mishap. It was me. The camera held the shot. The copy of me stared back, features dissolving in and out of focus, always a half second behind, always a little bit wrong. I reached up, touched my face. The figure on the tape did the same, perfectly out of sync. The real basement's air turned syrupy. I could feel something waiting behind the screen, some pressure building in the old cathode glass. My jaw ached from grinding. My breath came out short and cold. The camera stepped closer again, filling the frame with the mirror, with my face, with something inside the eyes that did not belong to me. The tape whined, the VCR straining as if it would snap the reel. The image warped, the colors bled, and the reflection in the mirror smiled. I did not. The screen went black, the tape hissed, then stopped. I could hear the house settling above me, the weight of old wood and stone, and the faint, unmistakable sound of someone breathing, not quite in time with my own. After the tape stopped, I just sat there, eyes pinwheeled wide as the TV's pale rectangle faded to a colorless pulse. I tried to convince myself it was over, that whatever haunted the tape was stuck on the other side of the glass, unable to cross. But the room had changed. The air had a static charge. The shadows leapt when I moved my head, and I could taste a metallic sizzle on the back of my tongue. I listened. The breathing hadn't stopped. It was slow, thick, the breath of someone with too much lung and not enough chest to hold it. Sometimes it matched my own. Sometimes it came half a beat too late. Sometimes it filled the silence between my inhale and exhale like an echo from a deeper cave. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself it was the house or my own pulse ricocheting off the cinder blocks. After the tape stopped, I just sat there, eyes pinwheeled wide, as the TV's pale rectangle faded into a colorless pulse. I tried to convince myself it was over, that whatever haunted the tape was stuck on the other side of the glass, unable to cross. But the room had changed. The air had a static charge. The shadows leapt when I moved my head, and I could taste a metallic sizzle on the back of my tongue. I listened. The breathing hadn't stopped. It was slow, thick, the breath of someone with too much lung and not enough chest to hold it. Sometimes it matched my own. Sometimes it came a half a beat late. Sometimes it filled the silence between my inhale and exhale like an echo from a deeper cave. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself it was the house, or my own pulse ricocheting off the cinder block walls. I told myself anything that would make it less real. But then, the footsteps started. At first, a soft shuffle from the ceiling above, a pattern I'd recognized as a memory of my grandmother, insomnia bound, padding from room to room all night. But the steps didn't belong to her. Not this time. They were heavier, dragging, as if someone was moving with legs too long for their body. They circled the house, then stilled. A pause. Then they came down the stairs. I turned, slow as mud, and stared into the dark. I saw nothing, but the sound was real, real as my own heartbeat. Step, pause, step, pause. Each footfall pressed dust up from the carpet until the whole stairwell looked like it was breathing. The TV flickered back to life, unbidden. The tape began to play, but I hadn't touched the remote. The image was my own face in real time, staring dumbly at the camera. The angle was perfect, down to the flecks of sweat on my upper lip. Behind me, in the frame, a blur, a shape growing more solid with every frame. Head bent low to clear the rafters, hands nearly grazing the floor. I looked behind me, certain I would see nothing. But the corner of the basement now held a density, a shadow darker than a shadow, and it seemed to ripple in time with the tape. Every time I looked away, it edged closer, but never when I was watching. I blinked, and it was 5 feet nearer. On the TV, the figure's face sharpened. It was my face, but waxy, uninhabited, the eyes wide and bloodless, the smile a single, unbroken line. It sat beside me on the couch, then turned to face me full on. Its hands lifted, and I felt a weight on my shoulder. Cold, immense, unyielding. I told myself it was a hallucination, that I inhaled too much dust, that I was simply caught in an old horror loop. But my own reflection on the screen shook its head, just a millimeter, and the shape in the basement let out a noise that was half a laugh, half a cough, and entirely wrong. The TV's volume rose, peaking in a high, needling whine. The screen pulsed, the colors ran, and the tape now showed the room not as it had been, but exactly as it was. Me, in the basement, with that thing beside me. In the background, the grandmother drifted past, still refusing to see. I reached for the remote. My hands were numb, as if filled with foam. I pressed stop. The TV didn't care. It kept playing, kept showing me, kept displaying the shadow as it leaned in, face pressed almost to the glass. I screamed, but the tape played my scream a second later, off by a beat, and the echo was higher, thinner, not my voice at all. The screen froze, the image burned in, me, mouth open, eyes wide, and that thing behind, hand on my shoulder, smiling with my face. A new noise started up, not quite laughter, not quite weeping, just the low, continuous whirl of the VCR rewinding itself. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The tape clicked. The image reset. I saw myself on the couch, pressing play. The tape started over. There were no delays, no loading fuzz, just the hard cut to me on the couch, remote in hand, eyes already glassed with the same static that ate the tape from within. I watched myself watching. At first, there was hope, the faint quiver in my lips, the shallow breaths, the flickering panic in my pupils, but I did not move. Not really. I sat as if waiting for instructions, as if every muscle had been spooled tight around a single, invisible axis. The shadow shape returned, but now it was not outside the frame, not stalking the periphery. It was seated right beside me, hand on my shoulder, face pressed near mine. If I turned my head, I knew our cheeks would touch. The camera did not pan. It did not blink. It held the shot, unwavering, for what felt like hours. The only motion was slow, sickening zoom, closer and closer, inch by inch until my own face filled the screen. The eyes were wide, all pupil, and the reflection inside was the room itself, the TV, the camera, and the endless hollow behind. When I finally blinked, the frame caught my lids mid-shutter, so it looked like the tape had glitched, like the machine was fighting not to show the next frame. I tried to look away, but the image held me in place. The volume ramped up, a hiss so loud it became almost a physical sensation, a pressure on my chest. The tape chewed forward, zoomed on my mouth, on my teeth, on the tiny, wet cave of my throat. I heard the click, then the sound dropped out completely. Static bled across the screen, swallowing the edges of the image, reducing it to a wavering white and black blizzard. Then the tape stopped, then whirled in reverse, erasing everything that had come before it, rewinding my own dread. And for a moment, I was free. But when the tape played again, I was already inside. The old family scenes were gone, replaced by a loop of the living room, me on the couch, staring forever out of sync. Sometimes I thought I saw other faces, layered beneath mine. My uncle, my grandmother, the little girl with the party hat. But it was always me in the end, always with the shadow, hand clutching my shoulder, squeezing tighter every time around. I don't remember how long I sat in the basement. Hours, days, maybe longer. Time on the tape has a way of flattening the world, turning moments to dust. Eventually, the TV went dark. The VCR spat out the tape. My hand, not entirely my own, reached to pick it up. The label was blank now, as if it always had been. Upstairs, the house was empty. Not quiet, just empty. A kind of silence that knows that you are there and is polite enough not to mention it. I left the tape on the kitchen table, went to bed, and when I closed my eyes, I could see the red, blaring digits of the timestamp counting down in my sleep. Every second a little closer to 0. But I knew it wasn't the end. Not for me, not for anyone. Because the next time that tape plays, there will be someone else on the couch. And somewhere in the static, the tape is still playing. The basement is still waiting. And the shadow is still watching. If you enjoyed tonight's story, you can find more from Ethereal Echoes, new psychological thrillers released every Wednesday and Friday. And if you'd like to hear them early, without ads, you can join us on Patreon. For now, let the story fade. Let the silence settle in. And if you ever find an old tape with no labels, whatever you do, don't press play. Good night.